Welcome along. You join us at Fujitsu World Tour London. The theme of this year's event is driving a trusted future. A few challenges out there at the moment, isn't there? The rapid evolution of technology, the emergence of new ecosystems, new structures. Lots of questions. How do we deliver the value back to the business? Delivering on all of those challenges. How do we enable colleagues? How do we enable value for our customers? How do we impact society at large? The purpose of this year's World Tour is to help you find the right mix of partners, solutions, and technology to address the very problems your organisation is faced with today. And that's the purpose of these interviews. Our job is to share the insight of the very challenges you're fronting up to. Next, we're going to be talking, key subject this, we're going to be talking AI, but specifically the trust and ethics around AI. And this is a hot topic, isn't it? Lots of cynicism out there, but is that right or is it misplaced? Should we be looking closer at AI applications? Well, guests at Fujitsu World Tour, they had the pleasure of seeing an esteemed panel debate a number of topics, and I'm delighted to say it's not just the attendees of World Tour that are going to get to hear from the esteemed panel, but also yourselves. I'm joined by not one, not two, but three doctors. I'm not sure I'm qualified enough to host you all. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. We're joined by Dr. Lutge, Dr. Naseer, and Dr. Tadeo. Please tell me I pronounced that right.
Perfect.
AI, there's a lot of debate around this at the moment. I guess if we start with some of the obvious questions, Dr. Vogel, perhaps if we come to you, what do we think the biggest challenge around the application of AI is right now for boardrooms?
Well, there are a couple of challenges in terms of ethics of AI. So some of them are definitely privacy or security, and also the question of liability. Who is to be held accountable in case something goes wrong? I think this is probably the most important challenge right now.
So I guess if you're in the CEO seat, possible business enabler, if you're in the CIO seat, I imagine there's a lot of fear, a lot of concern about blowback to the business then if you get AI wrong.
Well, there's a lot of risk involved, I would say, as with other areas in which companies are now facing more and more ethical risks, which ultimately can turn into economic risks. And I think this is an important thing to recognize, that you need ethics as a kind of early warning system to recognize those risks that can eventually damage your business. And in the area of AI, I see several such risks.
So the theme of this year's Fujitsu World Tour, driving a trusted future. How do we help instill trust within AI technologies? What do we need to do?
So the idea of trust into the technology is a little bit misleading or misled, perhaps. We don't really need to trust AI, and indeed we cannot trust AI as a technology because it's a technology that we cannot explain for the way it works. We need to trust the providers of this technology. We need to trust Fujitsu. We need to trust the digital companies who are giving us this innovation. And trust is crucial because trust drives acceptance and adoption of this innovation. And the challenge there for the board is to be able to foresee, to predict what the risks are so that we can mitigate them, but also to understand where the opportunities are and making sure that we invest enough to harness those opportunities. That's the biggest risk, is not to see what are the path ahead that AI can help us with and miss them for fear of ethical mistakes, for fear of backlash. And that's where something that we call ethical foresight can help. So identifying the risks and mitigate them, but also make sure that we don't miss out on opportunities which are really important for the company, but also for society, because there is not anymore the clear cut between the business and the society when it comes to digital and AI. There is a close connection, so there is a sense of responsibility from the company side to provide the best innovation as possible to society.
So if I'm a CEO or a lead within a public sector organisation, what are the key factors I should be considering? So there's some valid points here, and you're absolutely right, but what should we be considering to make sure that we get this right, both for the organisation and society at large?
So one factor is certainly accountability, making sure that you remain available for questioning and taking responsibility for what you do. But the other thing is also to understand that there is not just one unique form of technological innovation for all given societies. We need to get to the boards to understand that social acceptability is driven by cultural context in different parts of the world. So one key factor is really to understand what are the social aspects, the social value that we need to respect, but we can also leverage to foster and push innovation in a specific context. So on the positive side. On the other side is making sure that the interest of the users or the customers are perceived as the interest of the company as well. They are not necessarily something that is tanging or impacting the company negatively. If a company is able to support the interest of the users or the customers, that's a company that can offer its product in a much more trustworthy way than if it didn't.
Does that differ for like organisations like where you're working, public sector, education, academia?
Well, not too much of a difference, but from the technological aspect, there is some responsibility also on the technology, not just the vendors, but also technology, because the technology that we are developing or the technology that we deliver has to be trusted technology as well, because the way that algorithms are designed or the way that the AI is making decisions or how the machine learning is working, all these needs to be driven by a ethical design, let's say, or ethics by design. And this is something that that Fujitsu is strongly working on, and it's something that we are addressing at the moment in our applications.
How far does regulation need to go? Does this need to be regulated? How far does it need to go? What do we think?
So certainly at some point we will have regulations. I mean, we in some areas, smaller areas, we already have some regulation. We have, for example, the GDPR on data privacy in Europe. But on the other hand, I think at this point in time, it's more important to talk about the ethical rules for these technologies. It might be at some some point too early to introduce really tight regulation, because you really don't know what are the right rules for a given technology, and what can the technology do, what are the consequences. So we would probably need more research on these consequences before really introducing the kind of tight regulation. And I think at the moment, with ethical rules that become more concrete, I think we would go better.
So it's not so much about the extent of the regulation as much as it is about how we develop the regulation. So we need governance. We cannot have a technology which is so impactful on our societies and not think about how we drive this impact to make sure that it goes into the right way. And then the question is, how do we make sure that we have the right driving forces in place? And so my answer would be more about how we shape the governance. What kind of governance do we want? And for me, the answer is that to understand what kind of regulations are correct, what kind of regulation supports innovation, but also make sure that citizens' rights, our interests are protected, that we are able to approach this new phenomenon in a very much inclusive, multi-stakeholder approach. So we need to develop regulation, including the private sector, including the users, including the academia, the engineers, within the conversation, because it would be really, really problematic if we went ahead and defined regulation just thinking about political interests or just thinking about protecting the user's rights. It's a misservice at that point. These technologies are so powerful and there is so much good potential there that each form of expertise involved in this technology, or digital technologies broadly construed, they need to be involved into the discussion. So it's more about how we develop the regulation than the extent to which we define our rules.
Do you think the right discussions are happening now, or do we need to be talking about this more? Do we need to be including more people? Are we on the road to getting to a point where we're being inclusive of the right parties?
In the past 1 or 2 years, we have seen a number of initiatives around the world that were discussing and actually developing principles for AI, for ethics of AI, even like the UNESCO, for example, and others, the IEEE, and of course in Europe we have had some. So, of course, it can always be argued that there are still not enough people involved, but I think we have done quite a good job here. We have been discussing a lot on the high abstract level. I think what's in the task for now is to come up with more concrete solutions and more concrete tools that can actually be applied and that companies but also other organizations can make use of in terms of a concrete algorithm, concrete system, or a concrete robot.
Yeah, I think that I agree. There are a lot of frameworks now in place. The OECD has defined a list of AI principles which have been adopted by 42 countries by now and counting. And that's a very important step forward because it means that we are about developing, if not a global, but a framework that can be agreed upon by several countries. What we need now is private companies, private sectors, different sectors in societies to understand how they can implement these principles into the specific context. So these are very high-level principles which need to be translated into something more concrete that a practitioner can have in the back of his or her mind and think, okay, this is the right thing to do in this context, or this is something that we don't do because it goes against our principle. So it's more the bottom-up that we need to see now than the top-down. But 50% of the effort has been almost done, so it's quite on the positive side here. It's not so bad.
Good to hear. Last couple of questions, and I have to ask you this. Whenever we discuss AI, the very first question we get asked across social media, this is an exciting technology. What's the most exciting example of AI that you've each come across? So if we start with you, sort of Dr. Vogel, what do you think?
Well, I mean, being German, for me, still, I would say that the autonomous driving is the most exciting application I find, and which one is that's still, of course, in the early steps of being introduced. So I see there enormous perspectives, and that's quite exciting for me.
So the UN has launched and identified a few years ago 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are 17 goals that go from clean water to addressing climate change to ensure equality and fight poverty around the world. And the plan is to try to achieve this goal in 15 years, so by 2030. And a few years ago, the community has realized that AI can be a powerful engine under supporting the effort to achieve these goals. And there are plenty of initiatives going on throughout the world to support SDGs. So this goes under the umbrella of AI for SDGs. So using AI for climate change to support developing countries in terms of gaining water, improve the distribution of healthcare, education, you name it. So it's not a specific implementation, perhaps, but it's a very exciting area of work and research, and a lot of effort needs to be pulled in that direction. So to me, it's the most exciting area in which I see AI contributing to the welfare of humanity.
So it's a good answer. And I should say, if you want to hear more about the UN goals, there was an interview with European head Duncan Tate on Fujitsu Forum TV November last year. You'll see that interview on both YouTube, Facebook and Twitter, and he talks about Fujitsu's role and how they're actually helping to champion this. So thank you for that segue. What do you think? What's the most exciting example of AI that you've come across?
Well, AI or AI ethics?
What, do you know, both?
Well, for AI ethics, I haven't seen as such an example because it's relatively a new area.
Okay.
For AI, there has been quite a few examples which fascinated me. For example, AI for social good, where you encourage the people with, needs, special needs, and they are put in touch with other people of similar needs, networking, or also in the finance sector, anti-money laundering, for example, and having the AI to have identity theft fraud detected. I think that those are very exciting applications of AI.
Final question. I will come to each of you. A lot of boardrooms will be watching this. AI and the topic of ethics and its application, it's sort of top of their agenda. If you had one piece of advice for the boardrooms in tackling AI, what would it be?
Mine would be, don't be too cautious about AI. Think about realizing simultaneously the benefits in terms of economics and business as well as in terms of ethics.
Okay, so there is a quote from Churchill which says, we first shape buildings and then buildings shape us. And it's very much true for AI. AI is a transformative technology. We design it and then it comes back like a wave to us and shape our societies. And so it's important that boards, people who are designing technologies, realize that they have a responsibility towards the bigger picture, the societies as well. And so contribute as much as they can to make sure that AI is going to shape our societies in what we think is going to be best. Open, pluralistic, democratic. It's not entirely on their shoulder, but each of us is going to play a little bit of a role in this big picture. So I think that would be my message.
From my side as well, I will align with what Rosario just said. Having ethics by design, I think that's one of the key requirements for not only the technology vendors, but also people sitting in the boardroom, and they're designing or they're shaping the way how the society is going to be how the site is going to be looked after a few years. I think they need to consider ethics by design.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you all for coming by and joining us. I dare say there's going to be some questions off the back of this one. If you would like to be connected to any of our guests this afternoon, all you need to do is drop us a note on any of our social channels. We will facilitate an introduction. We've promised you insight, haven't we? Well, that was packed full of it. Plenty more insight still to come from Fujitsu World Tour. By the time we finish tomorrow, we would have brought you interviews spanning AI, blockchain, public sector, retail, a trusted world, ethics around AI, financial services. God, there's a lot coming your way, isn't there? Stay tuned. It's going to be worth sticking around. There's plenty more to come. Thanks for watching.